Well, I have to say generally I think that the quality of the writing is much better now. I think we had our good stories, and there were quite a few of them. But in between those, I think there were too many stories done by people who weren't fans of the genre. And I think the great thing about Doctor Who now is that, the fans who grew up watching the programme and who then became a kind of creative force in the business have ended up running the programme. And it's now very much a writer-driven show. In other words, you don't have a producer who knows nothing about writing and producing it. You have a writer who produces it. And he, I know, is Stephen Moffat I refer to now, of course, although it was Russell T Davies who first brought the series back. And I suppose in a funny kind of way, I'm responsible for both of them, really. The classic Doctors, at least, are certainly responsible for both of them, because they're huge Doctor Who fans. Yeah. And so, the great thing about its return was that it was propelled by the fans who watched it when they were growing up and watched myself and Tom and Patrick and all those Doctors. And so it's almost I'm asked all the time what I think is the success of Doctor Who, why it's carried on for so long. And I think the truth is that it is because it drives itself. People who are watching the series now, hopefully some of them will grow up to be writers or actors. Witness David Tennant, who want to be in or have something to do with Doctor Who, and it will reinvent itself again.
Absolutely. I feel I'm hogging you here, actually, because there are one or two people that have turned up. One of them may have a question.
Yeah, I bet you they
Should we throw it out to the... Do you have any questions for Peter? There's one at the back, just there.
Me?
Yes, you.
Yes. Lovely to meet you. You're my first Doctor too.
Thank you.
Around the time of the 50th anniversary, there was a special that you, Colin Baker and Sylvester did. Was that as much fun to do as it looked?
You refer to the Five-ish Doctor.
I certainly do. I love that.
I'm a rock star. Yes, it was enormous fun, and it was an enormous stress as well. I mean, it was the most amazing year because I was trying to get this done in the 50th anniversary year when we were being asked to conventions and events every weekend virtually. And I came up with this rather foolish idea of trying to film a little special with the classic Doctors. And I'd had the idea, I suppose about a year before that, when I was asked at the convention. Well, I was asked at many conventions, are you going to be in the 50th anniversary special? And I got so sick of being asked this question that on one convention, I think it was in Florida, I answered, I don't think we are, but if we're not, I'm damn well going to make my own. This came back to haunt me at the next thing I attended, where they said to me, as people say all the time, so is it true, are you going to make your own 50th anniversary? So I thought, oh my God, I'd better make one. So, and I had this idea that it would be quite a fun idea if Colin, Sylvester and myself were trying to get into it. And it grew, really. It started off, I think I probably envisaged it being about 10 minutes long. And the troubles really started, well, I say troubles, the opposite really, but Sylvester was very keen to help me out with this. But he was not only filming The Hobbit, but he was also doing a million conventions. So he was almost never available. And there was one particular moment when we had to film something really important, and he said, I won't be here, I'm afraid, I'm in New Zealand filming The Hobbit, but I can be back by such and such a date. So I thought, well, why don't I write a scene in which he's in New Zealand with Peter Jackson and leaves the set without telling anyone to come back? Because that was exactly what he was saying. So I did. And then I thought, well, I guess they can't have someone playing Peter Jackson, so I better ask him if he'll do it. So I wrote him an email and said, and he came back almost immediately and said, yes, I'd love to do it. And what's more, I'll get Ian McKellen to do it. The thing just went, every day I would wake up in this sort of panic of having to write scenes for the show and organise the filming of the show, and then I'd think of another idea which I thought would be really good, and then I'd ask someone if they'd be interested. They almost invariably said yes. There was only really one exception to that, and that was Tom Baker. Because I wrote him, I thought was a really neat little scene, which he could have done, and it wouldn't have affected anything else that happened at the 50th anniversary. And the idea was that, exactly, if you've seen the Five-ish Doctors reboot, we were sitting around, and Sylvester says, I wonder if we should ring Tom. We get Tom. And so Colin decides he will ring Tom. We ring him up, and Tom answers and says, my dear fellow, how nice to hear from one of my lesser selves. And then, as Colin begins to explain what we're doing, he just puts the phone down, pours himself a glass of wine, sits back on the sofa, and then just picks up the phone and says, I'm terribly sorry, my dear fellow, I just can't be asked. And that was what the scene was in the original script. But I wrote to Tom several times, and he didn't reply to me at all. And he actually said, I met him earlier in the year, and he actually said yes, he'd be happy to do it. But he didn't change his mind, obviously. But then I thought, well, that's exactly what he did to me in the Five Doctors, the original Five Doctors. You know, he was going to be in it, then he decided, no, I'm not going to be in it. And so I thought, well, why don't we use exactly the same clip from the Five Doctors that we used, in the Five-ish Doctors as we used in the Five Doctors, and just have it going to answer machine, and he's still stuck in the time vortex. So, and actually, I showed it to this friend of mine, Rhys Thomas, who does a BBC radio programme, and he said, I think that's funnier than the original scene you wrote. So but by that time, I was then hoping Tom wasn't going to suddenly turn around and say it. It did seem to be quite a funny idea. And I had the idea for Olivia Colman being in it, because originally, when we were down in Cardiff, I was going to do a scene where we just happened to be walking past a bus stop, and Olivia Colman is sitting at the bus stop, and we just stop for a minute and turn around and look at her, and she just says, well, it's all right, I'm in everything. That didn't work out, because we'd have had to get back down to Cardiff. So I just thought, well, why not start the whole thing by just a conversation with her and someone else. It wasn't going to be Sean Pertwee, because he was meant to be one of the, am I boring you? He was meant to be one of the Dalek operators, along with David Troughton, but he couldn't make that day's shoot. So I thought, well, why not make it a conversation between Sean Pertwee and Olivia Colman about, all the things they were doing, all these fantastic things they were doing, but they couldn't get a look in when it came to the Five-ish Doctors reboot. Anyway, it all just somehow fell into place, and I got my daughter in to be the producer. It was enormously helpful, because she just would phone people up and say, you need to do this, John. So, you could drop everything and come and do the scene. And so he went, oh, yeah, okay. Because she's a force of nature, my daughter. So he came along and gave us 2 hours with his chauffeur's motor running out of shot. His chauffeur was sitting there in the car with the motor running, but he was brilliant. The hardest thing with all these people the hardest thing we came up against was the agents, not the actors themselves. Once we got past the agents, everyone who became involved was unbelievably helpful and cooperative. And they all gave their time, no payment at all. And by the end of the shoot, Colin and Sylvester were actually shifting conventions around and flying back early from things to help us out with the filming. It had its downside. I did completely forget a convention I had in Newcastle. I just completely forgot it. I was in the middle of editing, and I got this phone call from the bloke who's running it, going, Peter, you're meant to be in Newcastle this morning. I'm terribly sorry. So that wasn't good. But all in all, it just fell into place. And then the only other thing, no, you are from the BBC, was that then, because it got longer and longer, so it was up to about 35 minutes, and the producer of Doctor Who, Brian Minchin, said to me, I really think you need to cut 20 minutes out of this to make it work. I said, we can't possibly cut 20 minutes out of it. He said, well, why don't you just have it starting in Cardiff? I think he just wanted it to be about Doctor Who set, really. So I said, well, that just won't work, because that was the bit that we elongated anyway. So he was fairly insistent, and then in the end I got around him by just saying, well, if you make me cut it, I'll have to tell the fans that you make me cut it. And then you'll have to answer to them. Before half an hour later came back, okay, I'm sure we can just cut like a minute. So just say, you terrify them. It's very good, very impressive.
There's a lady just on the front.
Sorry, yes.
Hi, I have a question. So the character of Doctor Who regenerates. Do you get asked to basically say bye-bye, or do you...
Is it my own decision?
Not yours, I mean everyone.
Oh yeah, well, largely it is your decision. There are a couple of exceptions. Colin Baker was kind of got rid of, really not because of anything he did. It was more of a power struggle within the BBC, that the then head of the BBC, Michael Braid, didn't like Doctor Who, hated Doctor Who, didn't like the producer, and thought that he could get rid of the producer by telling him to fire Colin Baker. Well, unfortunately, John Nathan Turner just fired Colin Baker, which wasn't the most honourable thing to do, I don't think. But anyway, so that wasn't really Colin's fault, but that was unfortunate. Then I suppose they did then cancel the series eventually. Whether that was the end of Sylvester, I don't know. You could probably say it was, say it wasn't. It's arguable as to what happened with Christopher Eccleston. No one really has got to the truth of this yet. I can give you my own view on it, but I don't know if that's true. That's a good idea. But largely, it certainly was, in my case, it was my own choice. Largely, it was the actor's own choice. You're an incumbent until you get, till you decide to leave, really.
Okay. Yep, gentleman back here. Yes, you said.
Yes, you have been selected.
What are your thoughts on the new Doctor, Peter Capaldi?
I like him very much. I did an interview with him shortly before he started, and I liked his idea that he wasn't quite convinced whether human beings were worth bothering with. In a deep and serious way, he wasn't quite sure why. Why was he protecting them? I think, to be honest, I think the last series was a bit companion heavy. I think I'd like to have seen him more at the helm of things, and he became almost passive, I think, in parts of it, which I don't think was particularly. It was a shame, really, because I think he was giving a brilliant performance, and it seemed to be very much focused on this sort of odd relationship with the companion and the boyfriend. But that's she's a lovely girl, I just felt it was a bit too much.
Peter Capaldi and I were doing voiceovers the other day, and the BBC put out a tweet which said Doctor Who and Doctor Pooh are doing voiceovers. Thanks, lovely.
I had no idea that was your nickname.
I'm keeping it quiet. Okay.
Hi Peter, I was talking to you earlier, and be careful how you answer this one.
Hello.
You were saying if there's anyone who worked for the BBC, I actually worked for the visual effects department.
Oh yes.
What would be your most memorable visual or special effect that you worked on set with Doctor Who?
Well, I will tell you exactly what my most memorable moment was. The one thing you could be relied on, this is grossly unfair, but it did seem to me to be very true, was every time they set up some kind of charge, they would come up to you, the special effects guys, and they would say, okay, it's just going to be a puff of smoke. And you knew the moment they said that, there was going to be an enormous explosion. And if they said it was going to be an enormous explosion, it would invariably turn out to be a puff of smoke. I'm sure it's very difficult. Anyway, one particular scene, we were, the 5 Doctors actually, filmed on a Welsh hillside. And Anthony Ainley and myself, Anthony Ainley, the most evil person in the universe, we were meant to be fired at, I think, by Cybermen. And there was meant to be this explosion, or rather puff of smoke, as they hit a rock. So I'm standing there, and Anthony Ainley is sort of Anthony Ainley and I are face to face, and then suddenly there's meant to be this explosion, and then he says to me, Doctor, I don't know what he was meant to say, the Cybermen or something like that. Anyway, so there was the special effects guy said, just a puff of smoke, just a puff of smoke. There was an almighty bang, but I thought, well, in the true traditions of theatre, I'll carry on going. I looked around, Anthony Ainley has disappeared and hidden behind a rock. The most dangerous person in the universe. He was a big wuss. He was very nice. He was very nice, but he was not a brave man.
Oh, brilliant. Any other questions?
Which writer do you prefer, Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat?
Oh, that's a cruel. How can I answer that? I will say this, and this may just be an age thing, that there are moments now in the last 2 or 3 series where I've had to turn to my children, who are 13 and 15 now. I have had to turn to my children and go, what's going on? I never had to do that before. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think Stephen Moffat is really good and accessible to absolutely die-hard Doctor Who fans. I think on a wider level, Russell T Davies is better for people who are not huge fans of Doctor Who. I think his story arc, he has a better view of an arc of a story. I think Stephen Moffat is fantastic, cannot be beaten on dialogue. He's just brilliant, brilliantly funny, and clever. But sometimes for me, again, I have to stress this, maybe it gets a little too complex. I can't quite follow what's going on by the end of it. But he is a brilliant writer, and I understand what he's doing. I think he wants to get rid of all those people who are more general fans. Let's get rid of them. Let's just restrict it to the die-hard fans, like me.
We've got time for one more question. Peter, can I ask you to choose, because the last...
Oh, I'll choose badly. I'm going to choose this. Yeah.
Is it that your daughter in Doctor Who is Jenny? Like, do you know whether she's going to be coming back?
What a good question. Is my daughter going to come back as Jenny? I would like to know why she's not, actually. I don't know what's happening. I think the series could do with a little spin-off. And there she is. She's wandering around the universe, even now, as we speak. A Time Lord, a clone of her father, her husband. This is where it all gets very complicated. Now, the irony is, apparently, that when the story was originally written, Jenny's character died. At the end, you know, when she died, she did die. And Stephen Moffat got in touch with Russell T Davies and said, don't let her die, keep her alive. So they came up with this idea, Stephen Moffat really came up with this idea that she would be propelled off into the universe to presumably have her own adventures around the place. But I'd like to know where they are. Because I think the poor girl needs a job, you know. She's a bit strapped for cash. Not like she has much going on in her life, really. Apart from the most successful actor in the history of time travel. That's not me, that's her husband, right? Yeah, so yes, I think she should get a spin-off series. Right to the BBC now. Yes.
Peter Davison, I'm so sorry we've run out of time. It's
Sorry
been,
too.
Yeah, it's been an absolute honour. Could you show your appreciation?
Thank you very much.